Welcome to the HNM Podcast, where I interview experts on industry trends, leadership insights, and team development tactics in the information communication technology and utility infrastructure industries. I'm Heather Moyer, President, CEO, and founder of HNM Systems, and today we welcome Beth Davies. Beth Davies comes to us with HR experience at household names like Tesla, Microsoft, and Apple. Beth hosts the podcast Career Curves, in which she interviews various guests about pivots in their career, how they navigated those changes, and what they've learned. Having received her law degree from Stanford, Beth has made several pivots in her own career, initially shifting from law to HR early on. Beth is a sought-after public speaker and currently a professor at IE University. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you, Heather.
So happy to have you. All right, well, let's get started. Before we get into learnings from your time at Tesla and Apple, I want to hear your early story. What made you excited and interested first when you were a kid?
So when I was a kid, I was just a kid. I liked school. I was a good student, but I liked to play with my friends. I liked to watch TV. I was just a kid. And so I always think this is a really interesting question, because I know when we're talking to people about their careers, we often will say to them, think back to your childhood and what were you passionate about as a child, and how is that going to give you some good insight into your career? And I never was that person. Like, my childhood really didn't give me many clues about my career. And as I've been doing my podcast, Career Curves, and talk to people about their careers, I'm actually finding this to be true for a lot of people. So I say that just to be able to say that if anybody's listening who is like, I don't know what I'm passionate about, and this question about my childhood doesn't help me answer it, okay, I think that's okay. You're normal, unless I'm abnormal, and I think I'm normal. So that was my childhood.
And maybe we could all be a little bit more abnormal, and that would be a benefit, right?
Yeah, I'm good with that too.
What was the inspiration behind you earning your JD, and how did that redirection of your career into HR go?
Yeah, so it actually ties back to what we just talked about passion. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do after college. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And both of my parents followed what they studied. So my father got a law degree. He was a lawyer. My mother got her teaching credential and then her teaching administration, and she was a teacher and then a principal. And so I just really believed that I had to have a degree that matched what I was going to do as a profession. And I couldn't do anything with medicine because that involves blood, and I would then pass out on a daily basis. I started off in business school, but I just sort of didn't feel my juices flowing with that. And so kind of by default, I went to law. And so the way that I transitioned from law to HR is, in my very first semester of law school, I felt like a fish out of water. The things that were exciting and motivating my peers weren't exciting and motivating me. There was a competitiveness to them, which I think probably leads to great success as a lawyer, that I just didn't have. I'm not that competitive. But what I realized, even my first semester of law school, was that I could drop out, but if I dropped out, I haven't completed. And I had spent a year between undergrad and law school waiting tables. And so I was like, I don't like the story that has me telling about myself. I'm a law school dropout former waitress. Like, I wanted to have a power story. And so as I thought about it, I thought, if I graduate from law school, even if I ultimately decide not to practice, I still am coming from a point of strength and a point of power. And so I decided to stick with it. Also, too, people were saying to me, the practice of law is different. The practice is different. And I didn't ask a follow-up question, which is it better? Because it was different, and I did practice law, and it was different, but for me, it wasn't better. And so I had a day where I was just miserable at work. I came home. I was so thrilled to be done with that week. I frankly was miserable many of the days that I was practicing law. And I just said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I only have one life to live, and I need to make a change. I've got to be satisfied in what I'm doing in my career. So frankly, I quit law cold turkey and started doing all kinds of informational interviews and started doing a lot of reflecting on what did I enjoy, what did I like to do, talk to people about what kinds of jobs in the corporate world might fit with me. And I met somebody who said, you should try HR, you should try learning and development. And this was at the Gap. And I said, great, I will. And so that's how I made that move.
Oh, I love that story. Was there fear? Were you nervous? How did that?
It's such a great question, Heather. I don't know. I wasn't operating from fear. I was operating from a point of, it's what I had to do. Yeah. I really had to do it. Now, what's interesting is I got the job offer at the Gap 6 months to the day after I left law. Now, the only reason I know it's 6 months to the day is when I got the job offer, my mother said to me, oh, 6 months to the day. You were so brave. You were so brave to make this move. And I just thought, oh my gosh, thank you, Mom, for not calling me brave on the front end, because that would have freaked me out. I would have gone, brave? If this requires bravery, I'm not a brave person, like no way. And I would have actually been shying away from making the move. But I was really driven by recognizing that my future happiness depended on me making this move. And I took a 50% pay cut for that next job, to go from being a lawyer to an HR trainee. I took a big pay cut. Took a big status cut. Yeah. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was my own journey and following my own journey and making sure I had a happy life.
Yeah, your happiness quotient. I love that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. You also spent some time at Tesla, so I would love for you to share an experience with us or observation from your time as Director of Learning and Development there, if you'd be willing.
Yeah, of course. So I was at Tesla at a really interesting time, which is I joined the company in 2011 when a lot of people either didn't know of the company or also were saying electric cars, that will never work. And there were about 800 employees. And when I left 6 years later, there were about 33,000 employees. And we all know where Tesla is today. So I'm really quite proud of what the organization has done. But I would say my top observation, so I was in charge of learning and development, which meant I was in charge of onboarding, and I worked very closely with the recruiters. And what we all really identified at Tesla was that when you think about what makes somebody successful in a company, not only like Tesla, but frankly in any company, is sometimes we think of only two things: skill set and knowledge, right? Do I have the skills to do the job? Do I have the knowledge to do the job? And at Tesla, we said, there's a third factor that frankly is more important than those two, and it's mindset. So if you've got the skills and you've got the knowledge, that's great. But the question is, are you motivated to be doing the work we're doing? Are you personally, intrinsically motivated so that when times get tough, you're going to persevere? Do you believe in the mission so that you're aligned, again, kind of when times get tough? But really what we recognized was mindset was the great differentiator between what caused people to be successful at the company.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I love that. What would you say is the most powerful piece of advice that you give to individuals that you are mentoring? Maybe somebody who's more junior in their career or someone who's just going to make a big transition. What's a piece of advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, so I would probably two things, and they're connected. One is I see people get paralyzed by the big question, like, what do I want to do? Like, this big, like, what do I want to do with my life? And I think the more important thing is, to focus on what is the right next move. The right next move. The world is changing so fast. You mentioned, that I host a podcast. And when I started in my career, podcasting didn't exist. So I couldn't say at the time, like, oh, right down the road, what I want to do is I want to be a podcast host. And so I'm going to create a nice linear path to make me a podcast host. That wasn't possible. But what's better is to say, as I keep learning about myself, as I keep learning about the world, what is my right next move? So a right move is one that allows me to keep, growing and using the strengths that I have and pushing to a side and not doing those things I don't like, right? How can I keep refining that? How can I keep saying, ooh, there's new opportunities emerging that I see in the world. How can I move towards them? So that's my biggest piece of advice, is focus more on the right next move. And the second one, though, that's related is, as you make these moves, other people may not understand why you're making the moves that you're making. And it's incumbent on you as the individual to be able to tell your story and to be able to knit together a cogent story that tells your journey. What I see is people make a mistake and they expect a recruiter to do that. Oh, a recruiter will look at my background and they'll see that I've got both HR and I've got law and I made training videos. So they should be able to figure out that I could do this job that they're posting.
Right.
No, don't make the recruiter figure it out. If you see how those knit together, it's your job to tell the story of how these things all work together and make you the strong, powerful individual that you are.
Oh, I love that. That is great advice. I can't wait for our viewers to hear that. That's just wonderful. Turning the table a little bit, what is a powerful piece of advice that you have been on the receiving end?
Yeah, so this came early in my career. I'm actually the same guy who hired me at the Gap. I started out at the Gap and I loved that job. I loved the company. The company was super successful at the time. I was working with a lot of people who were my age. We were doing really creative, dynamic things. I found out I loved working in the apparel business. And so I just loved the Gap. And he says to me, don't love a company, it can't love you back. And I was like, oh, he's so cynical. He's so, jaded. But I admired him and respected him enough to still reflect on that advice and to try to understand what it was that he was saying. And I got it, which is that I may love a company and as a result, maybe even stay there too long because I'm so attached. But you have to recognize that the idea of a company not loving you back is, if business goes tough, the company may have to cut you, even though you have been a stellar performer, even though you have loved the company and given it everything. If the business decision is that it's time for you to go, they're going to cut you. And we really can see this, unfortunately, in a time like COVID, where a lot of companies are having to make really hard decisions and pare down their teams. And they may say, I, as an individual, I, as the CEO of a company, or I, as a leader of a company, I really like you and care about you as an individual. As a business decision, I have to eliminate your job. I have to eliminate you. And so that was this idea of don't love a company because it can't love you back. I would say I've probably modified that for myself, which is, it's okay to love a company. It's okay to love your job. Don't marry it. It's not right. You don't have to make that marriage commitment that is supposed to be forever.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. A lot of expectation pieces, or not having expectation pieces woven into a lot of this advice. So I love that so much. And you often ask your podcast guests and sometimes close with, and you ask them, how do they define success for themselves? So we wanted to ask you as well, how do you define success for yourself?
Yeah, turn the tables on me. I do. I ask every guest that. And I'll tell you first, Heather, what's really fascinating about asking people that is I've now interviewed probably close to 30 people for my podcast, and no two people have given me the same answer. And so it's such a personal thing. And it probably is another piece of advice is, this idea of being able to answer that for yourself and then go for it. But it also is going to change over time, and it changes, as our lives change. So right now for me with success at this point in my life, success for me is inspiring others. So I'm thinking a lot probably about kind of a legacy piece, if you will. And so, when somebody says, I listened to an episode of your podcast and it was so inspiring, that to me is success. If somebody reaches back to you and says, that was great, I learned something, I was inspired, that nothing will make me happier. And so that to me is success. And it's also why I'm teaching, like you said, at a university or giving keynote speeches. All of that for me is about inspiring others. And that's success.
I love that. Well, Beth, thank you so much for joining us today on the HNM podcast. It's been absolutely a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, I've loved it. Thank you. And anybody who listens, if they want to link in with me, please do. If you tell me you're inspired, I'll be really happy. I'll love that. So thanks.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Heather.
Wonderful. And just to recap, Beth has her podcast at Career Curves at www.careercurves.com. Join her there for amazing insights from many guests on navigating the twists and turns of their career. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.